Welcome to the EPG Pathshala Linguistics course. This is the Morphology and Syntax paper, Module 6, which is about morphemes and processes. I'm Prabal Dasgupta. I teach at the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata. Greetings. Today we are going to cover how the morpheme theory handles the kinds of material we've been showing you in the earlier modules in terms of processes. So we begin the comparison of the morpheme style of doing morphology and the process style of doing morphology, hence the name of our module. We had told you that in the procedure for segmenting bits of talking into morphemic segments, which are called morphs, and then classifying those morphs into allomorphs of one morpheme at a time, there were some steps to follow in the procedure, and we'd itemized those steps in terms of A, B, C, D, E, and you will recall that step E involved finding non-obvious cases of allomorphy and incorporating them into the system. And in the last module, where we looked at how the procedure actually gets implemented, we did not say very much about step E because we told you that step E was complicated and needed lots of additional machinery that we could not introduce at once. Well, now we are going to introduce that additional machinery. We're going to tell you about 5 special types of morph that are considered most of the time among these additional things. To remember the 5 types, I have invented a mnemonic. Let me try it on you. Not everybody likes every mnemonic. If you don't like it, you can invent your own. There are various other ways to do this. The mnemonic is for the 5 types that we will talk about. I call the 5 types poem rédigé. Poem rédigé, as you see, has 5 syllables in it. Po for portmanteau, M for empty, Re for replacive, D for discontinuous, and Z for zero. If you want, you can pronounce it poem rédigé if you prefer. But you get the point. There are these 5 types, and if you have this mnemonic in your head, you can remember the sequence in which we propose to cover them. What is a portmanteau morph? Portmanteau is a term from a very long time ago for a particular kind of suitcase. It is from so long ago, I don't even know what kind of suitcase was called a portmanteau. It is enough for my purposes that it's a kind of suitcase. What do you do with a suitcase? You use it for packing. You put several things in the suitcase. So like the name implies, a portmanteau morph packs into it more than one morpheme. So you've got more than one morpheme represented inside one body. That is called a portmanteau morph. In the last module, where we covered some material from Southern Havyaka, we showed you some endings. If you want, we can go over that material and show you those endings again and say, look, this ending covers first person singular, that ending covers second person plural, and so on. But if you don't want to get fixated on Southern Havyaka, it is enough to look at a portmanteau morph from English. The portmanteau morph am, as in I am happy or I am unhappy, as the case may be. The word am is a single morph, as you can see. You can't segment it into a and There is no role for a and no role for in am. Am is a portmanteau in that it represents the morpheme be, the verb to be, and other morphemic material covering first person singular. You can only say I am. You cannot say you am, he am, we am, they am. Right? So as you can see, am is several things rolled into one. That is what is meant by calling something a portmanteau morph. More than one morpheme, which should have been side by side, expressed by bodies appearing one after the other, all rolled into one body. That is a portmanteau morph. That is one device used by the morpheme approach to morphology in order to handle the mismatch between how many morphemes you're postulating and how many morphs you can see in the actual text. Now let me get to my second example of a portmanteau morph. in my mother tongue, Bangla, if you look at the chart for the word bird, you find that when you say definite singular bird, you get pakhita in the nominative. In the accusative, that becomes pakhita ke. The pakhi part is bird, ta is for the definiteness, and ke is for the accusative case marking. No problem with pakhita ke. Likewise, when I go from the accusative case to the genitive case, I've got pakhitar, which consists of pakhi for bird, ta for definiteness and singularity, and r for genitive. So far, nothing to say. When I take pakhita ke accusative and pakhitar genitive into the plural, I find pakhi gulo ke and pakhi gulor. These are when I'm using a classifier gulo for plurality. Again, no problem. If you look at the chart, you will get the details. Now, when I go into plural indefinite, compared to the singular indefinite pakhi ke bird accusative marking and pakhir bird genitive marking, the plural indefinite is pakhider. Pakhider cannot be analyzed beyond saying pakhi for bird and der a portmanteau morph. Why is it a portmanteau morph? Because there is a single morph expressing the indefinite plurality and adding on the case affix. Furthermore, it mixes up the case of accusative and genitive. Therefore, if you compare the indefinite singulars, accusative pakhi ke and genitive pakhir, with the indefinite plural, you will find that both the accusative and the genitive come out as pakhider. So you can see here that there does a lot of combining. It not only collapses the distinction between accusative case and genitive case, which you can see in the singular, it also collapses the sideways boundary between the plural marking and the case marking, which you can see in the definite part of the chart. This is a very clear case where you cannot run away from the problem, and you have to admit that a single morph is combining more than one morpheme. In the Southern Havyaka data, you can escape from the problem by saying, I'm not going to postulate a separate morpheme for person and a separate morpheme for number. I will say one single morpheme carries both person and number as features on it. So in that case, what we were calling portmanteau morphs in Southern Havyaka stop being portmanteau morphs. You see, for something to be a portmanteau morph, it has to carry material from at least two morphemes that should have been side by side but are appearing together. But if you revise your analysis of the morpheme so that there is in fact only one morpheme in the picture, then your morph is no longer a portmanteau morph. So whether the Southern Havyaka material needs to be interpreted in terms of portmanteau morph depends on your analysis of the morphemes. But in the case of the Bangla facts, or in the case of the English verb am, there is no running away from the necessity of using a portmanteau morph analysis. So as you see, whether something is a portmanteau morph depends on the details of the analysis. Now I come to the second part of poem rédigé. The second part is M for empty, after po for portmanteau. An empty morph is a morph which has sounds in it but no meaning. Now you will immediately jump to the conclusion that I'm talking about what I discussed in an earlier module in the context of words like sist in resist and fer in confer and mit in commit and so on. I noted that those were morphemes that are not associated with any identifiable meaning. You will think that when I talk about an empty morph, I'm just repeating that information. No, I'm not. When I was talking about fer and zist and mit not having a specific meaning, what I was saying was it is true that confer has a meaning, refer has a meaning, suffer has a meaning. But if you try to extract the common meaning fer, which is shared by confer and differ and suffer, you don't find anything. It is difficult to find a common core of the meanings. That does not boil down to the statement that fer has no meaning at all. What I was saying was that the meaning of fer cannot be specified, cannot be pinned down, because fer is a piece of a bigger word which has a definite meaning, but fur itself does not make an identifiable contribution to that meaning. That is not to say that fur is empty. It is to say that fur cannot be specified. Today in this module, I am trying to talk about actual morphs which have sounds in them, which you can hear, but which literally have no meaning at all. I'm not talking about not specifiable meaning. I'm saying no meaning at all. They are meaning, empty meaning free. They have zero meaning. That is what I mean in the context of English words like medico-legal, Afro-Asiatic, or labiodental. You are also following a course in phonetics and phonology, so you've heard the term labiodental. You know that a labiodental sound, such as F or V in English, involves the use of the lips, hence the part labio, and the use of the teeth, hence the part dental. Now, the difficulty when you try to segment the word labiodental into pieces is that you get labi, you don't get labio. Why? Because the O is shared with many other words. Afro-Asiatic has O, medico-legal has O, there's an O in the middle all the time. So you have to pull out the O. So you're left with labi for lip. There is another reason for it, not just that the O is shared everywhere. You get labial, not labiol, but labial. So labi has to be pulled out as a morphemic segment anyway. There is no doubt that labi is a morph in the word labiodental. There is no doubt that dent is a morph in labiodental. Therefore, O in the middle must be a morph because there is labi on the left and dent on the right. And O doesn't belong either in labio, which is not a morph, nor in odent, because odent is not a morph. So you're stuck with O being a morph in labiodental. What does it mean? Nothing. O doesn't mean anything in labiodental. What does O mean in medico-legal? Nothing. What does O mean in Afro-Asiatic? Nothing. O doesn't make any contribution at all to the meaning of the word Afro-Asiatic or the word medico-legal or the word labiodental. It's not like fur or cyst or meat that the piece makes a contribution to the word, but you can't say what contribution. In the case of O, it is perfectly clear that the morph O exists. It is audible, it has a phoneme in it, in fact 2 phonemes in it depending on your analysis, but it makes absolutely no contribution to the meaning of the word medico-legal or Afro-Asiatic or labiodental. That is an empty morph. Fur or cyst or mit are not empty morphs, they are mysterious morphs if you wish. They are morphs that put your theory in jeopardy, for which you have to scratch your head and say, yes, it has a meaning, but I cannot tell you what the meaning is. Empty morphs literally have no meaning at all. That is what is special about words like medico-legal, Afro-Asiatic, and labiodental in English. If you go to languages like Sanskrit, there are lots more. You can keep looking in language after language and you will find empty morphs everywhere. In German, for example, when you take past participles of verbs like stellen and hören and kaufen and bestellen, you get the past participles gestellt from stellen, gehört from hören, gekauft from kaufen. In these cases, you can see that the past participle hört, for example, English heard, from the verb hören, English hear. In gehört, the final t in gehört is like heard in English ending in the final d. So if you wish, the main exponent of the past participle meaning is the final t in the German word gehört, then what is the g at the beginning doing? G in the German past participle is an empty morph. It is doing nothing, but it has to be there. It's a compulsory member of the word, but it doesn't do any direct morphemic signaling work. It does not signal any meaning. The signaling is done by T, if you wish. That is one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is to say that G and T together signal the meaning past participle. But that is slightly complicated because often you're going to get G without the T and T without the G. For example, when you take the German verb bestellen, which is to order, ordering food in the restaurant, the past participle of bestellen is bestellt. Here you have only t at the end and there is no g at the beginning. You don't say bestellt, you say bestellt. So here you can see that the basic exponent of the past participle is the morph t at the end of the word, which means that when the g occurs, as in gehört occurring corresponding to hören, the t is doing the actual work of expressing the past participle. The g is a decoration. A decoration is an empty morph. That is precisely what I'm trying to tell you. So in German you have these examples. You can look at such examples in English and make up your mind about what you want to say. In English, in addition to the regular plurals like cats, the plural of cat, or dogs, the plural of dog, there are also special irregular plurals like oxen, the plural of ox. When you start looking at the irregular plurals, you run into a very interesting irregular plural. That of child comes out as children. Now when you compare children with oxen, you feel like saying that n in oxen is shared with the n in children and is a sort of irregular plural marker. If you make that decision of segmentation, then you've segmented children into child, which corresponds to child, and n, which is shared with oxen. You're stuck with a r in the middle between the child and the n, and the r has no work to do. The r neither belongs to the child part of the word children nor to the n part of the word children. N is then left holding the plural baby, and child is left holding the actual baby, the child baby. And r in the middle has no baby to hold. It is a morph without a morpheme to represent. That is another example of an empty morph. Now, it all depends on how you do the segmenting. Suppose you say, no, I don't accept the idea that the n of oxen and the n of children have to be grouped together. I will let each word be handled separately. Therefore, I will segment children not as child plus empty morph r followed by n. I'm going to segment children as child corresponding to child followed by a very special irregular marker ren for the plural. If you do that, you're left without any empty morph in the analysis of children, and then English ends up not having an empty morph in the word children. You cannot get away with not postulating any empty morphs at all for English because you're stuck with the empty morph o in medico-legal and Afro-Asiatic and so on. So you're managing to escape without having an empty morph r in the word children is not a big deal. You haven't accomplished very much, but I'm just trying to find an example that you'll remember. Now I go to the third part of my poem Redizi or poem Redize. The third part is re for replacive morphs. Remember that I said in the process theory, you can say sing becomes sang and ring becomes rang for the past tense, and there's simply a process, a word formation process, that takes sing into sang and ring into rang and expresses the past tense. But that the morpheme theory can't do it. If you recall, I told you that the morpheme theory is compelled to declare that sang is exactly like walked and talked, and that therefore sang has to be analyzed as sing corresponding to the walk of walked, and something corresponding to the ed in the spelling of walked, and that something has to be a replacive morph. It has to be a morph that says, I'm a surgeon. I perform the task of surgically removing the e from the middle of sing and replacing it with a transplant, an a, so that sing becomes sang after I finish my job and taken off my gloves. So replacive morph is like a surgeon that performs an operation and turns the neighboring morph into a patient that is operated on. That is one way to think of a replacive morph. So replacive morph is this very strange device that the morpheme theory is compelled to create in order to save the idea that everything is always a sequence of morphemes one after the other, expressed by morphs coming one after the other. If you want morphs to appear one after the other when they don't appear one after the other, as in the case of sang and rang, you're compelled to pretend that they do. And your way of pretending is to make up a surgeon. That is what is done here. So you've got replacive morphs like this. If you get back to German, we have shown you German past participles using g and t. Now let us look at some German past participles that, in addition to using t at the end and g at the beginning, do something special in the middle. Consider the German word brennen, which is to burn. The past participle of brennen is gebrannt. In gebrannt, you've got one of these surgeons operating. It operates on the brenn part of brennen, and it takes out the e and replaces it with an a, so that brenn turns into bran when the surgeon has finished its job. In addition to this replacive morph replacing e with a, you also have two other morphs in the word gebrannt, which is the past participle burnt of the verb brennen, which means to burn. In gebrannt, as you recall from the discussion we had a few minutes ago, the real work is being done by the final T. That is the real exponent of the past participle morpheme. But there are two other morphs in the picture. There is ge, which is an empty morph, and there is this replacive, which turns e into a. Now, if you think about it, you will realize that the replacive e into a replacement in gebrannt is exactly like ge. It's a decoration. It is an empty replacive morph. In other words, it is doing two special things at the same time. It's performing a replacement, so it's a replacive morph, and it happens to carry no meaning, therefore it's an empty morph. So you have now seen two examples of replacive morphs. English e becoming a in sang or rang, which is a replacive morph carrying the past tense meaning, therefore it is not empty, it is just replacive. And now I've shown you in the German system that there can be a replacive morph which doesn't do any work at all of expressing meaning. It is simply a replacement. So you've got this replacement happening of the vowel e of brennen being replaced by a in gebrannt. Notice that in German, when vowels are replaced, this is not always pointless or empty. You have vowel replacement, if you remember from an earlier module. In German pluralization, for example, the singular for bird is Vogel and the plural is Vögel. A person using the morpheme theory for morphology would have to say that the plural word birds, which in German is Vögel, consists of item 1, the morph Vogel, item 2, the morph replacive. Please replace O by Ö. So Vögel is equal to Vogel plus replacement of the O by Ö. In that example, the replacive which turns O into Ö is doing actual work. It conveys the meaning plural. So that is a replacive morph in German which is doing actual work. Whereas in the past participle gebrannt, coming from the verb brennen, the replacive morph that turns a into a is not doing any work. So it is both replacive and empty. That is why I'm pointing out that there are two different things happening here. At this point in the lesson, if you go to the e-text, you will find that in the notation we have shown you a new convention. We were earlier busy exemplifying the convention for phonemes and phones. Phonetic segments called phones are shown in the notation with square brackets on both sides of what is written. Phonemes are shown with slashes on both sides. Nowadays in the computer age we call them forward slashes, because nowadays you also have a backward slash. So phonemes are shown with forward slashes on both sides of the material that is phonemically transcribed. Now we have introduced one more notational convention. If you have curly brackets on both sides, some people call them braces. What is put between braces is a morpheme. How does it work? For example, consider German Vögel, which means birds. Vögel is a word representing two successive morphemes. So you will have to show one morpheme with curly brackets, Vogel, which means bird, and a second morpheme, curly brackets, plural. So there is bird, plural, one after the other, 2 morphemes. How about the morphs? Well, if you believe the morpheme theory, you will have to show them as 2 successive morphs. The morpheme Vogel is expressed by the morph Vogel. A morph consists of phonemes, so a morph is enclosed in what from your point of view is the forward slash. So there are forward slashes for the phonemic content of a morph. Every morph, every allomorph consists of phonemes. It represents a morpheme. It is an exponent for a morpheme. A morpheme is implemented as a morph or allomorph which consists of phonemes. So to get back to my German Vogel example, the content of the morphs is that there are 2 successive morphs. The first one is Vogel, and the second one is a piece of surgery that says please take out the O and replace it with an Ö. So there's a replacive morph occurring after the main morph which changes the shape of the main morph. That is the way things are shown in the notation. Now I come to the 4th component of my mnemonic word poem rédigé. The 4th component is D for discontinuous. You will not be surprised to find that I repeat my Sanskrit data because Sanskrit is full of all kinds of morphs. There is discontinuous morphology in a Sanskrit word like bhinatti, which means pierces. How do you break up the word bhinatti? Bhinatti is based on the root bhid, which means to pierce, and it has a final ending ti, which means third person singular present tense. These 2 parts of bhinatti are very easy to handle. What about the na, and how come instead of bhitti you're getting bhinatti? How do you do this? The answer to that is twofold. First of all, you need to understand that the na part of bhinatti, about which in an earlier module we informed you that the na is an infix. In this module, we are giving you the additional information that that infix is empty. It carries no grammatical information. It does not give you any meaning. The empty morph na is an infix. It is infixed into the middle of the root bhid. As a result, bhid gets pulled apart and na gets placed in the middle of bhid, giving you bhinat. So you get bhinatti. As a result, our focus now is not on na but on the pulled apart bhid. Bhid becomes a discontinuous morph. It has one piece here and one piece there. In order for the infix to get into bhid, bhid has to become discontinuous. It has to stretch itself to hold the infix in the middle. It is a bit like a mother kangaroo holding a baby kangaroo in her pouch. The mother is discontinuous. The front part of her pouch does not directly form a continuity with the rest of her body because there's a baby interrupting her body. The baby is between the front part of the pouch and the back of the pouch. So if you think of a baby kangaroo, the baby kangaroo is an infix. When the baby is in the pouch, that is, not when the baby is out there jumping around. When the baby is in the mother's pouch, the baby is an infix and the mother is a discontinuous morph. The 5th part of my poem rédigé was zero morphs. You will be happy to hear that for your convenience, I am teaching you zero morphs, quite a few topics after empty morphs, because I have found that otherwise beginners get completely thrown off. They get completely confused and they think that empty morphs and zero morphs are the same. They are the opposite of each other. An empty morph has actual phonological material. There are phonemes. You can hear the empty morph. A zero morph is an invisible person. A zero morph is a morph with no phonetic content at all. A zero morph is a morph which is zero, but it conveys meaning. It is the opposite of empty. It is entirely eloquent, except that it has no phonemes to be eloquent with. It is zero. What is an example of a zero morph? Well, in English there are these famous plurals. The plural of sheep is sheep, the plural of deer is deer, The plural of species is species. The plural of series is series. So, if you believe in the morpheme theory, you're compelled to say the plural word sheep consists of two successive morphs, sheep for the animal and zero for the plurality. The English plural deer consists of two successive morphs, deer for the animal and zero for the plurality. I can make the same statements again and again for species and series, but surely you get the point. Until English changes, series and species in the plural carry instances of this very special device, the zero morph. One very important cautionary note at this stage, dear learner. All the 5 things in my mnemonic poem ready, portmanteau, empty, replacive, discontinuous and zero. Please do not make the mistake of calling them 5 types of morpheme. They are not types of morpheme, they are types of morph. A morph consists of phonemes, or as in the case of a zero morph, consists of no phonemes. But anyway, it tries to consist of phonemes and a zero morph fails. A morpheme does not consist of anything. That is why for a morpheme we have a special notation, curly brackets, different from the phoneme notation, forward slashes. These things I've been talking to you about now are morphs. They are not morpheme types, they are morph types. They are types of traffic between the morpheme and the phonemic representative of the morpheme. A morph is a phonemic representative of a morpheme. A morph is an ambassador consisting of phonemes, an ambassador speaking for the morpheme, because the morpheme cannot speak for itself, not having any direct access to the phonemes. It is very important to understand that the entire discussion so far today has been about morphs, which consist of phonemes, not about morphemes, which are grammatical abstractions. I hope you understand this very clearly, because this is another mistake that beginners keep making again and again. And it's much more serious than imagining that the word series is a plural for Siri. Now I want to tell you a little bit about the idea of paradigm in morphology. What is a paradigm? Well, you've been watching paradigms being displayed to you all the time. A paradigm is nothing but a chart of various forms of the same word. So when you have a chart that's a complete chart of all the forms of a word, like my Bangla word for bird, pakhi, which I showed you in the definite forms and the indefinite forms, in the singular and the plural, in the nominative case and accusative case and genitive case, I gave you a complete tabulation, if you remember, of all these forms of the word for bird in Bangla. That is a paradigm. A paradigm is a complete chart showing all the forms of a word. That's all. Now, why is a paradigm something special in morphology? It is special because some people imagine that the paradigm has special theoretical characteristics, that you need the paradigm to make a theoretical point, that there are some places in morphology where it is not enough to talk about morphemes, not enough to talk about processes. You have to pull out the chart and talk about the chart itself. The whole paradigm becomes a concept of morphology. That is why I wanted to introduce a paradigm. So if you compare the Hindi-Urdu paradigm for the first person pronoun, main, hum, I, we, with the paradigm for donkey, gadha, since I am a donkey, for me this is a paradigm about me, right? You will find मैं हम गधा गधे, मुझे हमें गधे को गधों को, मेरा हमारा गधे का गधों का, मैंने हमने गधे ने गधों ने, and in the vocative no way to call myself, but the vocative for the donkey is gadhe in the singular, gadho in the plural. If you look at this entire paradigm, you make some discoveries. You find that Pronouns are very irregular. The forms of a pronoun cannot be predicted in terms of singular and plural shapes at all, whereas for a gadha you can easily say the plural of gadha is gadhe, the plural of gadhe ko is gadhon ko, and so on. So you can show certain things. If you didn't have the whole chart, you couldn't make these comparisons. If you tried to go morpheme by morpheme, or if you tried to go process by process, depending on whether you're following the morpheme approach or the process approach, you wouldn't be able to make this statement about the entire paradigm. So that's one place where paradigms come in handy. Now, with the paradigm, you have to learn another concept. What is a paradigm? A paradigm of? A paradigm is a paradigm of a lexeme. We use lexeme in order to talk about a word. Yes, a lexeme is a word, but a lexeme is a word approached in a special way. For example, a passenger is a man or a woman, right? So how is passenger different from a man or a woman? A passenger is a man or a woman who is taking a ride on a vehicle. That is what a passenger is. Likewise, a lexeme is a word shown in a complete chart called a paradigm. So the words lexeme and paradigm go together. A lexeme is a word examined in terms of a paradigm. And a paradigm is that way of examining a word. So it is a paradigm of a lexeme. So you can't really learn the word paradigm separately from the word lexeme, or the word lexeme separately from the word paradigm. Another way to look at the word lexeme is that a lexeme is that which is represented in a dictionary entry. If you're paying attention to the shape of the word, surely you understand this, because lex in lexeme is supposed to remind you of the word lexicon, which is the fancy linguist's way of saying dictionary. We don't say dictionary, we say lexicon. When we say lexicon, we only mean dictionary. Don't be fobbed off by the word. So now you're familiar with paradigms and lexemes, and we can now tell you more about how the three approaches we've shown you so far can be spelled out as approaches to morphology. There are terms that linguists use for the three approaches to morphological study. The first approach is called item and process. This involves taking an item and applying a process to it and turning it into a different item. As you know, we started our course with that. We showed you how to set up word formation processes. These are item and process tools. The second approach, which is that of the morpheme theory, is called item and arrangement. Here you take the items as givens. They come down to you, they're handed down to you. You don't do anything to them. You just arrange them side by side, and they add up. The third approach is called the word and paradigm approach. Surely you will object, it should be called the lexeme and paradigm approach, because we just taught you that lexeme is the way we refer to a word in the context of a paradigm. But sorry, we're dealing with history. Historically, people call it the word and paradigm approach. They do not call it the lexeme and paradigm approach. What can we do? You have to take the terms as they come. So you've got three terms. IA, item and arrangement. IP, item and process. WP, word and paradigm. So there are these three approaches to morphology, and as you will gradually find in the rest of the paper, this is a morphology and syntax paper, these three approaches are also in competition when it comes to syntax. There is an item and arrangement way of doing syntax, an item and process way of doing syntax, and in some parts of syntax the paradigm also becomes crucial and cannot be replaced by either the arrangement approach or the process approach. So let us summarize. We were looking in this module at 5 special types of morph called portmanteau morph, empty morph, replacive morph, discontinuous morph, and zero morph. We went into examples, we went into the theoretical underpinnings, but we looked at these 5 morph types. Then we emphasize the fact that this completes our exposition of the morpheme approach to the subject of morphology, and we then placed it in perspective by comparing the theoretical approach which comes out in the morpheme implementation of morphology, called the item and arrangement approach, which we contrasted with two other theoretical approaches to morphology and syntax. The alternatives to item and arrangement are item and process, which we have been using from the very start of this course in the main line of our teaching, which is in conformity with how most linguists nowadays do morphology. And the third approach, which is a partial use in certain contexts, is called the word and paradigm approach. That was the subject matter covered in this module. We emphasize that it's important to keep using the e-text. Please don't get completely obsessed with just listening and not reading. Any course requires especially reading. Not every course requires listening. Listening is really optional. If you're viewing this, we urge you to please go to the e-text, not only for the notation and the written exposition, but also for references to further reading, in case you wish to do further reading. And we encourage you to do further reading because you shouldn't take one person's word for anything. You should always cross-check and compare different people's views and arrive at your own conclusions. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get back to us. Thank you for your attention.